I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thank everybody for coming out. First, call the roll.
Council Robinson.
Here.
Council Noon.
Yeah.
Council Scott.
Here.
3 present.
I'd like to thank Commissioner Backey from DCAM for being present. We have Councilor Gitchier is also present, Councilor Mercier. We have many residents, Councilor Leahy's present. We have representatives from Lowell Housing Authority present. And Back Central Neighborhood Association is here. Thank you for coming. And then we have Assistant Manager Baez Rose is present. Thank you. And Mr. McDonough. And I'd just like to start off by saying I requested this ad hoc subcommittee be put together and for the sole reason of we're all familiar with Superior Courthouse property, large scale, empty lot. It's still currently owned by the state. I believe it's going through the process to be classified as surplus potentially. With the governor advocating for the creation of housing and a potential $4 billion bond bill that's working its way through, potentially being approved, we don't know yet. I think it's great to have a conversation and see if we can wrap our minds around what kind of housing would fit that parcel in our community that made sense and what would be the best path towards that. I've heard from many residents in that area. One thing that definitely not interested in pursuing is any kind of social service use in that location. I think it has to be strictly housing, and what type of housing, I think is wide open. I think we have a block of clay on the table, and I'm all ears to letting the professionals kind of mold and shape and work with my colleagues to see, can we come up with something with the community that makes sense in that location? Whether it turns into more public housing, which Lowell Housing Authority already manages a property across the street, or whether it's a mixed between market rate and some affordability factor in there. I don't know what it looks like exactly in that parcel, but I think we all can acknowledge at least the starting point is we have a large scale parcel / lot. Now, from what I hear, repurposing something like that is a very large task because it was never designed initially for housing. So to try to go in and start moving marble and granite around and repurpose the interior, I don't see that being something that would be an easier project to try to present to the state to say, hey, listen, instead of maybe a $10 million or $15 million construction project from the ground up that would accommodate housing, we want to go $30 million to try to repurpose this shell. I don't know what that process looks like, but that's why I'm glad everyone showed up and I'm all ears. So if anyone would like to speak, please. And I think it's only right if we allow Commissioner Backey to at least explain where this parcel is in the process with DCAM.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. It's a pleasure to be back here. We're here probably for a couple of reasons tonight from our perspective. Most importantly, we welcome the opportunity to hear from both the community leaders and other community members about things that are important with respect to this property. We also want to share a little bit about our perspective and sort of where the property stands and what the kind of process options are from here. The building and site, for those who, I think most people are familiar, but there's actually quite a bit of property over there. There is the former Superior Court building, as well as its property or parcel encompasses that entire block. There are also a series of vacant lots which were used, some of them were used for parking, others have just never been developed, that are also state-owned, that are associated with this property. Currently, the building, all of this property is still nominally under the care and control of the trial court. They have not officially declared it surplus and given care and control to our agency, the Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. We expect, though, that they will at any time, and we are in the process right now of moving toward understanding and moving toward being able to dispose of the property, which I don't mean to throw it away. We mean that in the terms of making it available for development and reuse. One of the things, there are a couple of very significant considerations with respect to this property. As the chairman pointed out, the buildings themselves were built for a particular purpose, which made sense certainly at the time, and they're actually very well-built buildings, or a very well-built building. It's very attractive, but it is also, the spaces inside the building make sense for a early 20th century court function. Adapting them to other purposes is not a simple or inexpensive task. We also understand that we've had some conversations with the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and as a state property, we have an obligation to work with the Massachusetts Historical Commission and for any action that we take, including a real estate action. So we're obligated to notify them, which we have done. They have indicated that these buildings are significant historic resources. The local historic authorities also have indicated that these are contributing. It's a contributing building to one of the historic districts in downtown, and it is subject to the local historic board's jurisdiction in terms of review of any development plans. We are in the process of agreeing to a memorandum of understanding with Mass Historic as well as the local historic authorities about their involvement in the process of disposition as well as subsequent to the process of disposition, which presumably will be the sort of normal regulatory process that the Lowell Historic Board undertakes. But that does mean that there is a significant interest in trying to reuse the buildings, as opposed to this is not a case where it's easy to just clear the site and start from scratch. With that recognition of that reality that we have to deal with, and frankly, they are very handsome landmarks in the community, or it is a very handsome, I refer to it in the plural because there's the back building and the front, which are actually connected, but they are two different periods and two different eras of building. We are also concerned that there is given those factors, it is going to be somewhat challenging, I think, for someone to find a development scenario for both the buildings and the land where the market return that they can anticipate, it makes sense and balances with the cost of doing the project in the first place. And the longer we wait to get a private developer moving in that direction, the more difficult that's going to get, the more expensive it's going to get, and frankly, we will run into a challenge not dissimilar from the one that I understand the city spent a bit of time talking about last night across the street, where you have a building that is, designated historic and has some significance to the community, but the lack of investment in the building and just the simple lack of occupancy. It isn't even a deliberate thing on anybody's part. You can do the best job you can trying to sort of keep a building stable, and just not using it tends to lead to deterioration and makes it more difficult and more expensive for someone to redevelop. So with those considerations, what we feel at DCAM is probably in our interest, unless the city is interested in acquiring it from us, is to do an auction, which is what we are currently contemplating moving forward with, which would, the primary benefit of that is it would be the fastest process. And the state is not known for being fast or nimble when it comes to real estate transactions. And pretty much all the other options that are available to us either require additional legislative authority we don't currently have, so we have to work with the legislature first and then we can start a process, and that process will take some time, or just our processes that inherently take considerably longer to get to that point where you have a private party that is prepared to invest in the property and start a process of working forward. Now, that private party, whoever they may be, and whatever that turns into, is going to also necessarily enter into the normal permitting process with the city, so that they would no longer have. The state enjoys certain exemptions from local regulation across the state. This private party, whoever they may be, will not. They are a just like any other developer. It would be just like any other development. So the normal sort of structures and controls that you have in place with respect to zoning, with respect to hearings before the boards, with respect to the Lowell Historic Board review, would all be employed, and those would be all mechanisms to help ensure that the end product is something that makes sense for the folks who would have an interest and participate in those public processes. Now, the other alternative certainly is that one of the things we do with any real estate disposition is notify the local host community, and that has happened in this case, and you have an option to potentially acquire it from the state. And then at that point, you could really use it for your purposes and move forward as you wish potentially. Certain options, even for you in that transaction, also require some legislative authority that hasn't currently been approved. I should also point out that there is a piece of legislation that the Lowell delegation is championing, that is working its way through the legislature, that will give the city the authority, give both DCAM and the city the authority to enter into a municipal sales partnership for the district court building. And actually, I see Representative Elliott is here. He's actually been the champion of that bill. It would also provide additional authority and options for this property should the city wish to pursue something similar with this property. So we're happy to answer questions. I'm here with Stephen Andrews, who's our Director of Real Estate, and he is much more of the technical expert on the real estate process that DCAM employs. So I will certainly direct those sorts of questions his way. But I'm also happy to answer questions. And we're very interested in hearing from the folks assembled tonight as well.
I have a quick question.
Are you aware of any kind of programs where, with this initiative to kind of spur increased housing inventory statewide from the governor, are you aware of any programs that might be kind of in their infancy, where if the state owns a property and it's not being utilized and it might be categorized as surplus, are there any kind of streamlined programming that would allow a rehab or a repurpose for the housing to satisfy that housing goal? And due to the historic kind of involvement on this, is that something that would even be considered before it just went out to like a developer to become who knows what at that point?
Well, there's a couple of different questions in there. So the first answer is there really is no special program associated with state ownership and becoming housing that exists right now. There is language in the same bond bill proposal that you referenced, which would generate, in addition to creating authority to borrow money to support a number of housing investment programs more broadly, it does include language that streamlines the process of disposition of state-owned property for housing development. In this case, we actually already have the legislative authority to conduct the auction from a prior bill that passed, I think, almost 10, 15 years ago, that knowing at the time that the new Lowell Judicial Center was being built, this property was identified as it will eventually become surplus, so there was a certain amount of authority granted at that time. The language that's in the housing bond bill is not going to radically alter that, but it would also provide a lot of the same authority that Representative Elliott's bill specific to this property is making available. So one way or the other, it somewhat expands the options. I'm not sure there is a scenario that's faster in terms of, from the time point of view, in terms of a redevelopment, than the auction proposal that we already have the authority for. The other question I think that was implied in your question is around special funding. I'm not aware that there is any component of that bond bill that would provide a specifically targeted funding for the redevelopment of state-owned property. But there is a fair amount of a very large amount of additional authority for funding for housing generally, and much of that could be applied to this site as it could to other sites.
I believe this actually probably be for Ms. Byers-Rose, but Commissioner Bakey mentioned that there was it would still come in front of the zoning boards in the city of Lowell for the end use, and obviously that's a concern with the neighbors and everything that are here. Are there any type of uses that would be kind of exempt from our zoning regulations, or anything, any certain uses that would come forward that would be, I don't know, Dover Amendment type of thing, or like anything like that would be exempt from our zoning that we would have to be?
So to follow up, when the property remains under state ownership, they are exempt, don't have to follow the same rules. If the state goes through the disposition process and it is sold either through auction or some other method to a private developer, that's when all of the sort of normal land use board process stuff would be applicable. Dover Amendment has site plan review still. So there aren't, this property is within the South Common Historic District, and also within the MBTA zoning.
That was my next question, is
yeah,
about
so-
the zoning itself. What
Yeah.
zoning is in
So
place
so
there?
it would allow for the same density that the MBTA zoning, but that again is residential use, and it's not really an exemption process. There are still sort of a variety of land use review that would still happen, and also historic. But that would of course be for any private developer that was going to be entertaining development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that the mayor and asking you, Mr. Chairman, to head this ad hoc committees, take this step now, and glad to have Commissioner Becky and everyone here to hear from you. The concern that you raise is resonated with all of us, the council and everyone in this room, and everyone at home as well, with regard to the longer we have this sit, not do anything, you're going to see this going to become a demolition candidate like Smith Baker, right? So the step that we take now today, although we are not, the court is not in the hand of DCAM yet, but of course, when that time comes, the city will be the first candidate to inquire it. So that said, I think to step forward, I would suggest that the city looking for resource to stabilize that building, right? You have to do that because as is now, I don't think there's a heating in that building. There is? Okay, that's good. But we need to do that. We need to stabilize it, looking at it. And the other part about it too is that if we were to inquire and looking for a developer, I would suggest that the city do a walkthrough, invite developers, dozens of developers to come in and to see the building. This is more like, you kind of incentivize them to say, okay, this is the kind of building, this is the kind of things I can do to this building, right? Idea there. The other part that we need to look at also is that maybe a feasibility study, a structural study, either be the civil structure studies or whatnot. And third, fourth, actually, will be the input. I'm glad that the Back Central representatives is here, the input of the neighborhood that abutter this property going forward. They need to be involved in this process throughout. Their input is important partly because they live there. next to whatever's going to happen in that building. So that would be my suggestion, those 4 points. I know that, as Councilor Scott mentioned, understand that the half a mile radius from the commuter rail MBTA zoned and stuff like that. So that's going to be the next step for zoning board and planning board review for this project. So that's all I have to say for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Again, I say, my name's David Coach. I'm the president of the Back Central Neighborhood Association. I've lived there in the neighborhood for 63 years. And it would surely be nice to see some kind of a business going there where we could actually have people coming into Lowell, seeing that it's so close to the end of the connector and such, and the commuter rail, as you stated. And if we're going to look into housing, why can we not look into some kind of commercial business? If we're going to take people on tours to look at it, to redevelop it for housing, why can we not get some commercial people involved here in the state and have them look at it for a site? Because as you stated, it's going to be difficult to take that building and convert it into housing. It can be done easy enough. But seeing that it is the space that it is, maybe it would be a whole lot more wise for the whole bunch of us to turn it into a commercial space and have people have a job. I think we need a few of those too. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Scott?
Just so I understand it a little bit better. I mean, right now, this is not in the city's hands. It's not in DCAM's hands yet. You're still waiting for it to be released from the courts to DCAM for disposition. Could we hear a little bit more possibly, I guess, about the district courthouse and how this kind of partnership is happening for development on that? I don't know if that's something Rep. Elliott could speak about, or whoever, just.
Yeah, I've been working with a few city officials on what we call our sales partnership model. And what that model really entails is for the Commonwealth to convey the parcel to the municipality, and then the municipality will put out an RFP. What we've been doing is meeting kind of frequently, biweekly, with city officials. Really, there was a zoning change necessary there for the building to go up several stories. We provided a RFP that we usually use, working together to kind of draft the RFP and provide some technical assistance. We're waiting on legislation. The legislation that encompasses the Superior Court, the District Court needs special legislation in order to move forward. So we've drafted that legislation. We've agreed upon the legislation. And, this looks like once the legislation passes, the city was thinking about doing a pro forma just to make sure that the project that's being contemplated is financially feasible. And then once they do that, I say we because it's a partnership, we would look to collaborate together. The city would take the lead in putting out the RFP. The developers would then propose. There's a criteria that everybody really understands relative to an RFP, and then a selection would be made. What happens from there is whatever we agree upon as the partnership, usually we get 50% of the proceeds, but if they put the property out within the first year, there's incentives with the agreement that we enter into, because from our perspective, we're trying to get a property back on the tax rolls, trying to drive housing. We're not necessarily looking for financial gain. It's really about taking something that's not in a productive use and getting it back to a productive use. So that relationship that we've had now going on probably 3 or 4 months has been a very good relationship. And we're just waiting on the legislation and any support we can get to shepherd that legislation. We have an internal liaison person that's tracking the legislation, and I've been more than proactive in speaking to anybody I can speak to try to move this along. And if I could get some external help from folks who've been very proactive. Yeah.
Well, you got help here.
He's-
We're gonna go outside of me, but
He's been actually wonderful. The whole team, I think, in terms of coming up with the strategy and working together, I feel very comfortable that, this will be a successful housing project that will bring a new kind of product in terms of what I've seen from the architectural renderings that they're contemplating, a very contemporary, modern building that I think would lead to the landscape in the area. So I will concede my time to the counselor. And
Rep. Elliott?
I don't have much to add other than I do know the bill. I sit on the Committee on State Administration. That bill was reported out and referred to Ways and Means. I've been in contact with City Manager Golden and Rep. Mom, and we just it has to be moved out of Ways and Means, which I have a call into the chairman, Michaelwitz. I actually meet with him on Thursday, so it's a good opportunity to voice, our concern and the importance of this both to the city and to DCAM. So, as the speaker mentioned, any support that we can muster, throughout the legislature and others, will be important. So, I think the speaker encapsulated it a lot better than I can. But we're here, we're pushing forward. I mean, we have a deadline of the 31st, so. We want to get it out of Ways and Means, get it to the floor, and send it over to the Senate. So we're working on it.
Thank you very much. And so what I'm hearing is if the city takes a hard look at this Superior Courthouse property, and when the time comes, there is a path for a partnership that includes assistance with the RFP and everything going out to developers for whether it's commercial or residential or mixed or whatever that looks like. But there is a partnership already started on a similar property.
There are two courthouses, as most folks here know. The district court is the one that Stephen Andrews was describing here. That is, the city and DCAM are building this partnership that ultimately the city will be the lead on the RFP to have that redeveloped. At the moment, the city has not communicated to DCAM a similar interest in doing the same thing at the Superior Court. If the city is interested in that, we are very open to doing that also with you there as well. That would require this legislation. At the moment, because we have not heard a similar interest from the city yet, and we may never, if we don't, we are recommending and intending to proceed with an auction process, which we already have authority to do for the Superior Court. Okay? And the reasoning behind that particular method is to get it, again, to accelerate the process of getting it into the hands of somebody who would be responsible for its redevelopment.
So again, for Ms. Baez Rose. So I guess we're trying to see the difference between the two properties. And my understanding was on the district courthouse, possibly we had interest in developing that, in redeveloping that, purchasing that. I mean, is that an accurate statement? I mean, is there interest on the city's part to redevelop the Superior Courthouse, or is it more allowing just the state to auction it off and do their own private deal? I mean, what is the city's interest in the property?
Yeah. So for the district courthouse building, I think that given its location, the size, the kind of that spot, we felt lent itself really well for denser housing development, given the location of the Lower Locks garage and, its adjacency to downtown. So we also have heard from people, in our conversations with developers that the site is manageable, that if there was demo associated with that or some adaptive reuse, that those numbers financially were still within reason to make a development happen, which is, I think, why the decision was made to move forward with that partnership agreement. Because as referenced, there is incentive on our side if we can sort of help push forward on redevelopment. There are benefits to the city too, and so that seemed like a more obvious and a more obvious spot that a developer would likely be interested in our opinion. The Superior Courthouse, I don't believe that we have that same sort of level of confidence that it would be a sort of as straightforward, attractive development opportunity. Not to say that it isn't a development opportunity given the size of the parcels, but the adaptive reuse of that site, I think, is significantly more complicated than the other courthouse. And so for that reason, we haven't yet sort of stood up and said, like, yeah, we're really interested in following this same model. We've been in conversations with Adam and the folks at DCAM to talk about, things that could happen. We think that the zoning, would allow for mixed use and those types of things. But I'm not convinced that our direct intervention will help that property move forward in any way faster than like maybe a straightforward auction process through DCAM. So at this point, that's why we haven't sort of taken that step yet.
On that note, though, so the benefit to the city, though, would we have more control over the end use? Like, if we're looking for an acre crossing type development that's, commercial with residential, I mean, would we have more input on that when we're involved at the table? Is that?
We would, because essentially through this partnership model, DCAM gave us a draft RFP, which we then took and like kind of morphed to be more particular to what we're looking at. And so in that scenario, we'd be able to feed language into what essentially that RFP is. But, we're also doing some of like the minimum maintenance work on the property and, as a part of the deal, right? Like we're also helping to make sure it's secure and, it's likely that we'd have to take on that responsibility too in a case with the Superior Courthouse. So yes, that being said, I think, we also have very good and open communication with DCAM right now about the Superior Courthouse and have been kept up to speed as to what their thinking is. And so, if they move forward and we are not directly involved in like an RFP process, I still think that we'd be able to have, open conversations with them, but also we would not give up our ability to do the oversight necessary because, as we've previously talked about, the land use board process is still very much in effect. And so any development that's happening at that site wouldn't necessarily just be able to walk in and do whatever, right? They'd still have to kind of follow with our zoning or have to go in front of those land use boards to ask for any variances.
Thank you, but I have a quick question. So aren't there some exemptions, though, to the land use boards and local control on properties like that, on all properties for the most part? So say a large-scale organization wanted to come in and grab the Superior Courthouse and turn it into sober living, just for example. The city could not do anything about that at that point if it was sold off at auction privately, correct?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember if sober living would
What are the
require
allowances?
a special permit or not.
No, but what
Like
are
a
the
shelter operation, for example, requires a special permit regardless of the zone that it's being built in. Every time, no matter what, there's not really an exemption for that kind of stuff. So I'm not like off the top of my head thinking of anything in particular that would get through the land use board process without any review.
Thank you. Mr. McDonough?
Thank you, Corey. Thanks for everybody for making time to come down here today. I don't want to, my name's John McDonough. I live at 26 Highland Street in lovely Lowell, Massachusetts, and I beat Dave out. I've been living there for 70 years, so I beat Dave out just a little bit. I don't want to turn it into a shelter or help you out bit. And I'm going to give Adam these pictures before he goes home, and just to prove to his colleagues how terribly unmanaged our helpful people who really need help are being undermanaged in Lowell. Sleeping outside in the rain. We have to stop doing this. Speaking specifically to the Superior Courthouse, the parking lot at Elm and Pollard Street, that should be turned into a neighborhood parking lot where they can buy spaces, lease it out, or something like. It was never utilized fully by the court when it was being utilized as a courthouse. It wasn't used that much, except for high jury days. But other than that, wasn't used too much. So I'd like you to consider giving that to the neighborhood. So far as the grass on Hobson Street, that could be changed into parking quite easily. I'd like to see it turned to a taxable property. But before we do that, I think we should give it over to the police and fire departments temporarily. Have the police and fire department move over there, raise the JFK Civic Center, build a brand new JFK Civic Center, and move the cops and the fire back over there once it's complete. This would enable the city to showcase that building to developers down the road, turn it into permanent housing, a taxable property in the end. And like Vesna said, time is of the essence. We look at the Elliott School, Elliott and Summer Street. That got ping-ponged around as a government entity. No one really knew who owned it. I'd go in there, who owns this building? Get out of here. That's the answer you get. When I walked down to Superior Courthouse and asked them, why are they digging up the front of the building? They said, get out of here. So that's not an attitude that people in a building should have to anybody. So that's all I really want to put in your ear. Thanks for coming, Adam.
Thank you. Councilor Mercier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this meeting so that residents can weigh in on this. As a council, we share our opinion, but I think when we talk about that particular area where the Superior Courthouse is, that's not my neighborhood. I don't live there. I don't know what's best for that building because I really don't have any input except as a counselor. But I think that this is a good meeting because now we can weigh in on what John McDonough says, the people that are here have to say. It's not about what we say. It's about being good neighbors and considering their needs and what they think because they live there. We have many people here that spent a lot of money and a lot of time to invest in that neighborhood through their business, whether it be a funeral home, a law office, you name it, it's there. And they have stake in that neighborhood. And so what I think should be there, maybe they don't want a shelter. Maybe I don't know what they want. So that's why we're here, to hear what they have to say. It isn't what I say because I'm a city councilor. So thank you for convening this meeting, and I'm very happy to be here to listen to what everybody has to say. That's very important. And it troubles me a bit when you say an auction. Is it the highest bidder? And who knows what they're going to put? Are they going to put a shelter? That scares me. That frightens me. So I don't know which way to go, but number one is what the concern of the immediate abutters are. I'm not an abutter. I don't care what they put there, but I should for the overall picture of the city because I represent the people in that neighborhood and I care what they care. So please consider their needs as well and what they want. Not what I want, not what you want, but this is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mercier. Councilor Lee?
Thank you. I just kind of want to echo what Councilor Mercier said too, and what Mr. McDonough said, and people from Back Central. That I think the bottom line here is we have two courthouses that are empty. Hurd Street seems to be more the best place for housing what we're looking at. We have to put our heads together with our representatives and with these gentlemen and figure a way to expedite this stuff. They can't sit here for years and years. You know, we have to figure a way to make it go faster. If we want housing down on Hurd Street and we want to do something for the neighborhood where it's more of a neighborhood project, the Superior Court, then that's what we need to do. We need to listen. I mean, parking over there is a challenge, so maybe some of it for parking. Maybe if that building gets redeveloped into housing, the main entrance of the Superior Court could be some sort of restaurant, boutique shops, something, you know, where people are attracted to come into, and you could live there and shop there and eat there and attract something like that. But let's take the input from the neighborhood. Hurd Street's a little bit different, but let's get the input from that neighborhood. And I mean, I would like to see Hurd Street developed started within the next 2 years. I mean, a year if you could, but I mean, that building, it's my understanding, it needs to be torn down and then let somebody start and put some parking underneath. If we have to use steel beams, why not just let them park under the building and raise it up 10 feet, and you can park right under the building, and then you have the parking lot across the street. But we need to figure out how to get the project going. That's the main thing. So thank you for having the meeting.
Thank you, Councilor Leahy. And I'd just like to say, I mean, I totally agree. I think I have one question though. So it sounds like we're pretty much all on the same page. It's this meeting was called to be a listening session as to what are some of the potential ideas, and we have members of that neighborhood and the public coming, presenting what they'd like to see in that area. Our jobs, as was mentioned by my colleagues, is pretty much to listen and say, okay, how do we get to what we're hearing the community wants in that area? I like the idea of mixed use, maybe restaurant, retail, some livable space. I think that's the model that you're seeing in a lot of communities that work. I mean, you go to Salem, it's that whole Tuscan Village. That's a model that was developed where it's mixed use, retail, food, a little commercial space, and residential. I have a question though. So if that's kind of the direction the city would like to nudge that property into, would that be something that we would be better served looking to enter into a partnership like was mentioned with the RFP to try to maybe turn portions of it into parking for the neighborhood, and then consider developers that might be looking to do mixed use in a location like that? Would we have more input to nudge a project like that as a partner with DCAM when that time comes? Or if it goes to auction, are we kind of just sitting back with our fingers crossed saying we hope that someone will listen to what we would or the neighbors would like to see there?
The simple answer to that question is yes, in that you would, the many of the things that we've just heard are things that the state is not really in a position to facilitate. So if you want, for example, there was a discussion of municipal public safety uses in that building. That's not really something the state can do. Neighborhood parking is not really something the state is in any position to do. And if we auction the property off to a private developer, their likelihood to do those kinds of things is pretty low, frankly. So if those are the things that are really important to the city, the municipal, this partnership model is a better way for you to have the control to sort of drive toward those sorts of things. The one caution that I just want to be really honest with everybody is that ultimately neither the state nor the city, I believe, I can't speak entirely for the city, is going to be doing this project. This is not, the DCAM does not have the capacity to, we're not funded to renovate the building or renovate parking lots or anything else there. This is with DCAM as a real estate transaction, not a capital project. And it's really up to the city whether it wishes to invest its resources in some sort of a development project there. But I'm imagining that those are limited as well. So that all speaks to really needing to get a private party involved. And a private party is going to approach this as a business transaction, that they are going to be looking at what do they have to invest and what can they receive as a return? And in order for it to make sense for them, they're going to have to see it be more profitable they're going to need to get more return than they invested in order to do it. So as the whole sort of package is considered, we should all be cognizant of the fact that we need to protect the viability of somebody making that equation work. And the more things that you restrict, or the more not profitable or no return uses that you include, or the more real estate you take out of that deal, the more difficult that equation is. There are solutions to that, and that's usually subsidy. So that's the other alternative, that either the developer or the municipality can seek subsidy or provide. In the case of the municipality, you may have some ability to provide subsidy that may help drive some of those things, and that makes some of those things possible. But those are all much more complex, and it usually, the more subsidy is required, the more time it takes to sort of put a deal together that works. And that obviously, you run into then challenges of the building is going to become more expensive to renovate with every passing year. So I'm not telling you should do one thing or the other, but these things all need to be taken into account as you think about it.
Thank you very much.
And if I could add one thing, if you went with the sales partnership model, you're taking receipt of the property. So now you will be plowing it, cutting the grass, maintaining that building. And that's something that you should take in consideration. It worked really well for the district court. You have to take that under consideration. I want to be very transparent that you're now the owner.
But the costs of doing that maintenance are costs that you can recover in the end disposition. So it's not that assuming there is a sale price in the end to somebody, before we work out a split between the city and the state, as Stephen mentioned earlier, you first take off the top reimbursing the city for those actual costs that you've incurred to maintain the property, if you choose to go that route.
Thank you.
Just as far as the property itself goes, there's 2 parking lots, correct? On the lot? There's how many?
There are 2 parking lots. There's
Yeah.
a parking lot that is directly behind the building. And then there is what used to be the juror.
Pollard Street and
It's
Elm.
across,
Yeah.
diagonally across the intersection behind the building.
Yeah.
There are actually at least 4 parcels
Associated with this, outside of.
with that juror parking lot,
Okay.
and even beyond the juror parking lot, that aren't developed as parking at the moment. There's one parcel where the building and the parking lot directly attached to
And
it.
then there's 2 buildings on the lot.
Well, there's one building. It was.
That's what I was going to ask. What's
I
historically?
made the mistake of sort of referring to it as 2, but there is one portion of the courthouse that was built in the mid 1800s, and then that building was literally picked up and moved back on the property, and then another portion of the building was built in I think the 1920s.
So they're both historic restrictions, like for both properties? I thought it was just one.
It's all subject to. Mass
All
Historic
subject,
has designated
okay.
All of it is historic.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that was.
Thank you.
One was built in 1850, and the other one was built in 1890. Neoclassic revival, and another revival period for the two buildings.
So for expansion opportunity on the site is what I was thinking beyond.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of land on that parcel
Right.
beyond the building. There's the parking lot behind it, and then there is the area if you're facing the building on Gorham Street to the left, to the north of the building. But that also is pretty attractive land right now.
Yeah. So is there an analysis like underway right now by the city as far as, development opportunities or anything like that at this point in time for you? Yeah, sorry.
We have not yet. I mean, we've sort of visited the site, looked at it. I know that folks have done a tour of the interior, have generally sort of not made the decision to spend money yet to look into it. We've tried to do a similar type of analysis that we did with the Heard Street Courthouse, but given the sort of scale of the Superior Courthouse building, we can't figure out a way that we think that those numbers would work in a way that it would be helpful for the city to be involved yet. But
the
could-
discussions continue and
absolutely.
Thank you. Councilor Dakota?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did like that song, so I don't know why you turned it off. I think Mr. Baggy kind of answered my question a little bit. It seems like the Superior Courthouse is a heavy lift at this point, and a lot of time I think that it will take to get it to what we want it to be and what the neighborhood wants it to be, I think. So it brings me back to piggyback off of Councilor Leahy's concern is, what are we looking at from a district courthouse on the transfer of getting this started as quickly as possible?
We've pretty much prepped everything ready to go, but we can't, we can't convey it until we have legislation. That's one thing about Commonwealth property. There's an item of legislation that kind of dictates the transaction that is actually voted through the legislature. So we don't have.
What is a ballpark time frame, let's say?
If I could answer that question.
Are we going?
If I could.
You were going outside. Let's go. What is something like that of a time frame? Move it over.
So the session ends at 31st, as everybody knows. So that's what we're up against. And, we're doing our best to move it forward along with, let's say there's 7,000 bills. Now, of those 7,000, let's narrow it down to, and Manager Golden can probably speak to it a little bit better than I after 26 years, but there's a finite number of bills that, that will make its way. And I'm confident this is going to be one of them.
And that's an excellent point. At the end of the session, there's usually, and don't quote me, but there could be 10, 20, 30 land bills that come forth that make it to my desk. And we're hoping that at the end of the session, that the district court is one of those bills because of being proactive as DCAM and everybody else that would like to see this go forward. And then once that legislation passes, we plan to move immediately in terms of conveying it to the city.
Conveying it right to the city.
Yeah, and then
And the time frame of that is
right based on what it says in the legislation, right?
Okay.
So we've got to follow the roadmap, but we're pretty sure that we drafted it, so we have a good understanding of what that roadmap entails.
Passes to when the city would actually own it.
So from legislature to the city, how long are we talking?
We got to look at a couple of items, a couple of months.
Couple of months. Okay. All right. You answered my questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Just
Ms.
to
Baez-Rose?
sort of add, so once we get it, then it has to go through the RFP process. We have that RFP drafted already, and so we're essentially waiting just for kind of this stuff to happen in order for us to put the RFP out. So once the property actually is handed over to the city for this, we're ready to hit the ground running on it. We're just sitting on a draft RFP at the moment.
And we coordinated a timeline. I probably should have brought it, but there's already a timeline and a timetable that once they get it, how long it will be in the RFP process. We have a very extensive developer database, so we're supplying the database. They have a database. So we've kind of figured everything out. Like, we're prepping everything we need to do, so once it's released, it's ready to go. So the cake's in the oven. I'm just waiting on pulling it out and serving it.
Someone needs to pay the gas bill.
I'm going to use that with the chair.
Yeah, that was actually my question. It's kind of who's in the liability on this, though, on the district court. I'm saying the liability end of it, like, so it's the state, and then it's going to be conveyed to the city, and then the city's,
It'll be the city's property.
Once we own it, it's on.
and then we hope that we have a developer that comes forward. Is that? I mean, yeah.
Can you speak to what the ingredients are of the RFP you spoke of?
Mixed use housing. So for the district courthouse on Heard Street, it's we're eyeballing housing. Ideally, we'd like to see affordable homeownership, but we're trying to see if those numbers, would make an attractive development. But given the zoning there, we anticipate it'll be some sort of mixed use housing.
Would you have the black remain a parking lot?
No, the plan is to, given the changes we've made to the DMU and that the parcel is also in the MBTA communities, and that the Lower Locks garage is one of our lowest utilized garages in the city, that there's plenty of capacity to absorb parking. Of course, assuming, that you create kind of like drop-off spaces and places where if somebody's like bringing their groceries up and that kind of stuff. But no, we'd anticipate it being mostly a built out site.
We have RFP for the former Superior Courthouse.
No, that's not, not yet. That's what's being discussed tonight.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Well, I'd just like to say thank you, everybody that came. Again, I think this is infancy stages as far as the city's concerned. Is the city even interested? That I don't know. This is kind of like the first discussion that we've had, and we don't even have everybody involved with the discussion right now. So, but there was definitely a lot of information provided as far as the process goes, and where we are between the two, the difference between the two. So I greatly appreciate that. I think it was great for the community to come out and hear firsthand exactly where we are with both of these parcels, because again, it's in their backyard. At least we have a clearer image of some of the things that would like to be seen at the Superior. If there is anything that the city would get involved in with that property, that's not something at this time that any of us even are prepared to guess at. But I really appreciate you taking your time to come down, and hopefully we'll be scheduling another one maybe at some point, in the next month or two, once we have a little bit more conversations, and hopefully we can get some projects like this going in the pipeline. It sounds like district is moving along pretty well. I mean, it's just a matter of going through the pieces that are in place already, and maybe we'll be having a discussion once that's situated on what we're looking at with the Superior. But greatly appreciated, and if anyone has anything left, anything else to say, please. If not, I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Scott. Thank you all for coming out.